What is up, guys? Welcome back to another GeekaWhat video. In this video, I'm going to be building an insane all-AMD gaming PC build with a 5950X and 6900 XT. As if that wasn't enough, I've got an absolutely insane case, cooler, SSD and RAM to really give us one hell of a build. Let's do this. To kick things off, I'm going to give you guys a quick swizz around all of the components I've selected for this build. Starting off with the processor. This right here is AMD's Ryzen 9 5950X. It's the highest end Ryzen chip that AMD currently make, and their strongest CPU, on balance for gaming and editing and just basically killing anything. With some of the most insane multi and single threaded performance I've ever seen, does this thing still hold its own against the backdrop of new Intel 12th gen chips? We'll be looking at that more later, especially from a gaming perspective. I'll be pairing up our CPU with this RAM kit from G-Skill. This is some of the highest end DDR4 memory you can find and allows us to compare against DDR5 while saving a bit of money and still getting a kit on the high end of the spectrum. With these insane silver heat spreaders, nutty RGB and this crystal light design that looks better in person than it does on photos, this is one of the most bonkers RAM kits we've ever seen and is the successor to G-Skill's other legendary kit, the Trident Z Royal. I'll be building the system onto this motherboard from Aorus. It's their X570 Aorus Master. It's basically the highest end X570 board they do, bar some of the water-cooled options. With 10 gigabit Ethernet on the rear, PCIe Gen 4 support, and lots of overclocking on AMD's lovely X570 chipset, it ticks all of the boxes today and gives us a great basis of which we can build our PC from. Onto the board goes Seagate's FireCuda 530. This is a Gen 4 NVMe drive and comes in lots of different flavors and capacities. You can get it with either a heatsink or a non-heatsink. This one costs slightly more, but I think looks a little bit better, and a range of different capacities. This 1TB drive still delivers 7GB read and 7GB of write, making it one of the most competitive Gen 4 drives on the market. It really is insane. The cooler today for our system is provided by Corsair. It's their H170i Elite Capellix. This is a 420mm liquid cooler. That's right, 420mm that basically only fits in one case. Corsair's own IQ7000X. With plenty of RGB fans, more glass than most houses, this case looks incredible. It's absolutely huge, and we'll be building a full water-cooled system in it soon, so make sure to get subscribed for that one. The graphics card then is the other big talking point of the system today, and you know what? I'm going to go ahead and unbox this right now. We've covered the 6900 XT very briefly on the channel, and only actually had a GPU sample in for a short period of time, so shout out to AMD for lending us this one for hopefully a little bit longer. The 6900 XT performs incredibly well when it comes to straight rasterization. You don't quite get the benefits of ray tracing and DLSS that you'll find on the Nvidia cards, with AMD's alternative tech impressive but not quite so mature. The first thing that strikes me about the GPU is its size, which I'm guessing is where this comes in. This is one of the most incredibly massive GPU support brackets I think I've ever seen, so I'll be interested to see what that looks like later. And then underneath that is this bonkers triple fan XFX design. Oh my goodness! I think I've figured out the GPU support design. That is mental, and I guess the card needs it because not only is it basically, let's be honest, a triple slot card, it's also incredibly heavy. The makeup of this GPU is just bonkers, and if there's one thing that XFX definitely do well, it's keeping a GPU cool, something that's important for this powerful 6900 XT. The only component I haven't yet mentioned is the power supply, which we'll look at in more detail later. An 850 watt unit from NZXT with a fully modular interface and 80 plus gold certification. Let's pop our wonderful 6900 XT to one side for now though, and take a closer look at the motherboard, installing into place the CPU, RAM, and of course our M.2 SSD. Over recent years, Gigabyte and Aorus have really upped their game when it comes to high-end gaming SKUs, taking the fight well and truly to Asus ROG, and of course more recently MSI with their MPG, MEG, MAG naming SKUs. One thing I do like about AMD is just how simple the installation process is for the processor itself. It's simply a case of grabbing your CPU and finding the little golden triangle on the processor, matching this up with the triangle on the top left corner of your motherboard's CPU socket. Lift up the retention arm, drop the CPU gently into place. This is actually quite nerve-wracking. That's like a $500-600 CPU. Gently install it by popping the arm back down and hope that, for goodness, it doesn't fall out. I'll next be installing the RAM or the memory. This particular RAM won't be to everybody's taste as far as aesthetics go, but I personally think it looks incredible. Go ahead and pull back all of the clips on your RAM DIMM slots, like so. Line the notch on the RAM DIMM up with the notch on the slot, and then basically slide it in. Apply a bit of pressure with either of your thumbs to clip it into place, and do be careful because these DIMMs actually feel a little bit sharp, so you don't want to cut yourself on them. But once they're installed, and especially once they're lit up later in the video, they are going to look incredible. Like actually completely and utterly bonkers. One more RAM DIMM to go. Nice and easy. That looks awesome. Next up, we'll be installing the SSD. And for this one, you'll need to grab yourself a nice small screwdriver, because we'll be popping into place the Seagate FireCuda 530. Now, we've worked quite closely with Seagate on the channel here for a little while, and their SSDs have come on such a long way. In fact, this is a better buy than WD's Black SN850, due to its higher read and write speeds, the latter of which for me is the most important. For video editors, especially people writing large sums of files, these drives are awesome, and with some of the best endurance ratings on the market, they're also set to last quite a while. With high-end GPUs like the 6900 XT and the new Nvidia 3000 series, your storage really can become a bottleneck and hold your system back. So don't be silly, get yourself a nice SSD and protect yourself from those all-important bottlenecks. We can now go ahead and move our motherboard assembly over into the case. I already talked a little bit about this, but for our system today, I've selected the Corsair iQ7000X. One of the largest, most crazy and insane cases I have ever used, and probably will ever use. Unless you're going to run a 420mm radiator, this case is completely pointless. But for a build like this, where budget's not really too much of an object, it makes complete sense. The thing about this case that surprises me every time is just how heavy it is. What I was about to do was go ahead and remove this sort of controller area on the rear panel, as it would have made it difficult for us to install the backplate. But I think we can actually just use the stock mounting hardware that comes included on the motherboard with this Corsair cooler. So no worries there, we can just go ahead and straight away slide our motherboard in, fastening it down on each of our locations. This motherboard tray does have a vertical GPU mount, but I think today we'll just stick with the horizontal, especially given the support bracket that XFX include, something I'm very intrigued to try out. While the case is laid down flat like this, I'm also going to go ahead and start installing our CPU cooler. The 420mm radiator will technically fit anywhere in the case, either up front or up the top. But I think for this build, up the top makes the most sense, as it also gives us 3 extra fans for exhaust airflow, in theory keeping the whole build nice and chilly. We're going to pop the radiator at the top and then clamp our CPU cooler around our Ryzen 9 5950X. And don't forget, you need a dab of thermal paste between the cooler and the CPU to create that nice thermal bond. Once that's done though, the motherboard's in, the cooler's in, the case is pretty much done, and we can move on to the exciting GPU. The 6900 XT is a really exciting proposition, and although GPU stock and availability is still really not any better than it was 6 or 12 months ago, at least AMD now have an answer at the high end of the market. Now this little GPU bracket that comes included, as you can see here, screws into the back end of the GPU. All we need to do is simply line up our holes one by one, and then in theory, there we have it. These should line up really, really nice and easily. I'm going to go ahead and find the screws in the GPU box to actually secure these in, and then we can go ahead and install the graphics card itself. Okay, so a touch cumbersome, but we did get those in eventually, and then it's in theory a simple case of just installing these onto the PCI lanes at the rear. Before we do any of that though, make sure to take off all of this lovely plastic from the GPU that's currently protecting it. I'm telling you something, there's one hell of a peel incoming. Here we go. Oh yes, very nice. And there's even more as well. There's loads on the front. Not quite as satisfied on the front of the card than I thought it might be. It just keeps splitting, which is really annoying. And of course I've installed this GPU support bracket, which is hardly helping matters either.
1 hour later.
Although, to be fair to XFX, once they are all peeled off, the card does look even more incredible. It's a complete monster, and that will let us install it into the case, and it will look absolutely incredible as well. Really, really like the design of this 6900 XT. I'm not being funny, that looks utterly insane. There's only one more component left to install into the build, and that is none other than our power supply. This right here is the NZXT C850, an 850 watt unit that will provide enough wattage for this system. Running a Ryzen 9 and a 6900 XT, you're probably not going to be making a bad decision running up to a 1000 watt unit if you wanted to, but you don't quite need to, and this 850 watt version will work very nicely. I'm going to go ahead and plug up all of our cables and wiring, and once that's done, we can boot the system up and start playing some games. Before games though, we need to see how good it looks in our usual style here on the channel, and we'll rejoin you for the benchmarks after the epic glam montage. I'll see you in a second, but first, roll that montage. Awesome stuff! Now that we've seen just how good this all AMD system looks, it's time to see just how well it performs in a wide range of gaming benchmarks. On your screen now is a summary of all the numbers we were able to achieve in a wide range of titles. It should give you a great idea of this system's overall performance, tested out primarily at 4K. I'm going to cover off just a couple of these titles in more detail, but if you'd like to find the full unedited gaming benchmark runs for all the titles, check out the unlisted playlist link in the description below. In Call of Duty Vanguard, we managed to achieve 76 frames per second on average at 4K high settings. Visually, the game looked absolutely stunning as well, which is really important when you're spending this much money on a PC. Forza Horizon 5 was a similarly positive story, where at 4K ultra settings we managed to achieve just shy of 70 FPS on average. Apex Legends was also really strong. Here at 4K high settings we got 100 frames per second on average, and the game visually looked absolutely awesome. But what about if you want to tune those frame rates even higher and drop down to 1080p competitive? Well, in Fortnite, we did just that and managed to achieve 301 frames per second on average. Wow. Fortnite looked pretty good as well, despite it being only 1080p as far as resolution is concerned, and this high frame rate is going to be great for you competitive gamers out there. With that though, that pretty much wraps it up for this video. If you'd like to find more of our detailed benchmark runs, check out the links in this video description. Thanks for tuning in though, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.